What if the person who could save your life was someone you'd never met, but who knew you better than anyone else in the world? What if the stranger who appeared in your darkest hour carried secrets about you that not even your closest friends knew? Welcome back to Second Chance Stories. Today, I want to share with you one of the most psychologically profound cases I've ever encountered, the story of Robert Chen, a 58-year-old retired engineer who discovered that sometimes our greatest teacher can be the person we might have been. This isn't just a story about surviving terminal illness. It's about confronting the unlived versions of ourselves and discovering that it's never too late to become who we were meant to be. Robert's story begins in October 2020 in the oncology ward of Seattle General Hospital, where a man who had spent his entire life building bridges for others was about to discover he needed to build the most important bridge of all, the one leading to his own redemption. Robert Chen had always been a man of precision. For 34 years, he'd worked as a structural engineer, calculating load-bearing capacities, analyzing stress points, and designing bridges that would safely carry thousands of people across rivers, valleys, and highways. But on October 15th, 2020, all his mathematical certainty crumbled with 3 words from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. "How long?" Robert asked, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "With aggressive treatment, we might extend your timeline to 12 to 18 months. Without treatment," Dr. Morrison paused, 3 to 6 months, possibly less." Robert stared at the x-rays on the wall, his x-rays, as if they were blueprints for a bridge he'd never wanted to build. "I need some time to think," he said quietly. What Dr. Morrison didn't know was that Robert Chen had been preparing for this conversation his entire life. Not because he was pessimistic, but because he was practical. He had no wife, no children, no siblings. His parents had passed years ago. His closest relationships were with colleagues who sent Christmas cards and neighbors who nodded politely in hallways. He had built bridges for the world, but somehow he had never learned to build connections for himself. Robert's apartment was a testament to a life lived in careful isolation. Engineering journals stacked neatly on shelves, a drafting table where he worked on personal projects, theoretical bridges that existed only on paper, photographs from job sites where he stood alone while crews celebrated around him. There was one frame that held particular significance, a faded acceptance letter from the École Polytechnique in Paris, dated 1985. Robert had been 23, brilliant, and accepted to study advanced structural engineering in Europe. It was his dream, his chance to design revolutionary sustainable bridges that could change the world. Instead, he had stayed in Seattle to care for his aging parents. It was the right choice, he whispered to himself, as he had countless times over the decades. But the letter remained on his desk, a daily reminder of the path not taken. Now, facing his own mortality, Robert made another practical decision. He would skip the aggressive treatments. He would spend his final months putting his affairs in order, completing his theoretical bridge designs, and dying as quietly as he had lived. He admitted himself to Seattle General for palliative care, bringing only a few personal items: his laptop, his drafting supplies, and that faded letter from Paris. Over the next hour, William displayed an impossible knowledge of Robert's life. Not just the public facts, but the private moments, the small regrets, the dreams carefully folded away. He knew about the woman in Robert's graduate program, Catherine, who had invited him to coffee 17 times before giving up. He knew about the job offer from a prestigious firm in Tokyo that Robert had declined because it felt too risky. He knew about the sustainable bridge design that Robert had been developing for 15 years, but never submitted to competitions because he was convinced it wasn't good enough. "You built bridges for everyone else," William observed, "but you never built one to your own potential." "I had responsibilities," Robert protested weakly. "Responsibilities, yes, but also fears." William's voice was kind but penetrating. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear that if you reached for what you really wanted, you might discover you weren't capable of achieving it. Robert felt tears threatening, emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. "Why are you telling me this? I'm dying." William leaned back in his chair, his expression infinitely compassionate. "Are you? Or are you finally ready to start living?" When William left that evening, Robert lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and feeling something he hadn't experienced in years: possibility. The next afternoon, at exactly 5 p.m., William returned. "I've been thinking about what you said," Robert began before William had even settled into his chair. "About building bridges to your own potential? About whether it's too late." William smiled that mysterious, familiar smile. "Robert, you're a structural engineer. You understand that the strongest bridges are often built over the deepest chasms. The question isn't whether it's too late. The question is whether you're brave enough to start construction." That night, for the first time in months, Robert opened his laptop and began working on his sustainable bridge design. Over the next 5 days, William's visits became the anchor of Robert's existence. Each conversation peeled back another layer of regret, another wall Robert had built around his true self. On the third day, William asked, "Do you remember why you became an engineer?" Robert thought back to his childhood. "I was 8 years old, visiting my grandparents in the countryside. There was this old wooden bridge over a creek, and I was terrified it would collapse when I crossed it. My grandfather told me, 'Someday, you could build bridges so strong and beautiful that no one would ever be afraid to cross them.' And have you?" "I've built safe bridges," Robert said defensively. "Safe, yes, but beautiful, revolutionary, the kind that make people stop and marvel at what human imagination can achieve." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "I was always afraid that if I tried for something extraordinary, I'd create something catastrophically flawed instead." William nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "So you built competent bridges instead of magnificent ones? Played it safe instead of changing the world? It's not that simple, isn't it?" William's voice became more intense. "Robert, you have a design for a sustainable bridge that could revolutionize how we think about infrastructure. You've had it for 15 years, and it's brilliant. Why haven't you shared it with the world?" Robert felt defensive, then honest, then devastated. Because what if it doesn't work? What if I've spent 15 years on something fundamentally flawed? And what if you haven't? That night, Robert made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He called Dr. Morrison and asked about the experimental treatment options. "I thought you had decided against aggressive treatment," she said. "I'm reconsidering. If there's a chance, even a small one, I want to take it." The treatment was brutal. Chemotherapy that left him nauseated and weak. Radiation that burned his skin and exhausted his spirit. But William continued his daily visits, and their conversations became lifelines. "I've been thinking about Catherine," Robert admitted during his 4th week of treatment. "The woman from graduate school. I looked her up. She's a civil engineer in Portland now. Married, but..." He paused. She published a paper last year about sustainable urban planning. I think she might understand my bridge design." William's smile was radiant. "What are you going to do about that?" "I'm going to write to her. Not romantically, I'm not delusional, but professionally, as one engineer to another. And your design," Robert took a shaky breath, "I'm going to finish it, really finish it, and I'm going to submit it to the International Bridge Design Competition." William leaned forward. Even if it fails, because you're right. I've spent my whole life building bridges to help other people cross over their obstacles. Maybe it's time I built one for myself. By February 2021, Robert's oncologist was using words like remarkable response and unexpected improvement. The experimental treatment was working better than anyone had dared hope. Robert had completed his bridge design, submitted it to 3 international competitions, and reconnected with 4 old friends, including Catherine, who had responded to his letter with enthusiasm and professional respect. "I feel like a different person," Robert told William during what would turn out to be their final conversation. "Actually, I feel like myself for the first time in decades." William's smile held a strange sadness. "You are yourself, Robert. You always were. You just needed to remember." "I want to thank you," Robert said. "I don't know who you are or why you came, but you saved my life." "No," William said quietly. "You saved your own life. I just reminded you that it was worth saving." When Robert woke the next morning, he realized William hadn't said goodbye. For the first time in weeks, 5 p.m. came and went without a visitor. Robert asked his nurse, Linda, if she'd seen the well-dressed older gentleman who had been visiting him. Linda frowned. "What gentleman?" "Robert, you haven't had any visitors since you've been here." "That's impossible. William has been coming every day for weeks." "You've seen him. You brought him coffee twice." Linda's expression grew concerned. "Robert, I've never brought coffee to anyone in your room. According to our records, you've had 0 visitors since your admission." Robert insisted Linda check the security footage. What they discovered was impossible to explain. The hallway cameras showed Robert's door clearly. For weeks, they had recorded Robert's daily routine. Meals delivered, medical staff entering and leaving, the occasional cleaning crew. But never, not once, did they show anyone matching William's description entering or leaving room 237. More disturbing still, during the hours when Robert remembered having conversations with William, the cameras showed Robert sitting alone in his chair, talking animatedly to empty air. "I don't understand," Robert whispered, staring at the footage. He was real. He knew things about my life that no one else could know. Linda's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes, when people are under extreme stress, the mind can create very vivid experiences. It's not uncommon in patients facing terminal diagnoses, but Robert knew it was more than hallucination. William had known specific details about his engineering projects, had understood complex structural concepts, had possessed insights that felt beyond anything Robert's conscious mind could have generated. Six months later, Robert's cancer was in complete remission. His sustainable bridge design had won second place in the International Bridge Design Competition and was being considered for implementation in 3 different cities. He was packing up his drafting table, preparing to move to a larger apartment, the first move he'd made in 20 years, when he found a photograph he'd forgotten about. It was from his college graduation, 1984. He was standing with his parents, wearing the traditional cap and gown. But what stopped his breath was his own face in the photograph. At 22, Robert had possessed a confidence, a spark of ambition and possibility that had somehow been lost over the decades. His posture was different, more upright, more assured. His smile was broader, more genuine. And his eyes held exactly the same warmth and wisdom that he had seen in William's face. Robert walked slowly to his mirror and studied his reflection. At 58, after months of treatment and recovery, after rediscovering his passion for engineering and his capacity for connection, he looked different than he had a year ago. He looked more like the young man in the photograph, more like the person he might have been if he had made different choices, more like William. The truth hit him with the force of a structural revelation. William hadn't been a mysterious stranger who somehow knew everything about Robert's life. William had been Robert, or rather, the version of Robert that existed in parallel possibility. The Robert who had gone to Paris, who had taken risks, who had built magnificent bridges instead of merely safe ones. The Robert who had learned to value his own potential as much as he valued his responsibilities to others. Somehow, in the extremity of facing death, Robert's consciousness had manifested this alternative self, not as hallucination, but as inspiration. William represented everything Robert could still become, even at 58, even after decades of playing it safe. Today, Robert Chen lives in Portland, Oregon, where he consults on sustainable infrastructure projects. His bridge design is being implemented in Seattle, and he's teaching part-time at the university where Catherine, now a close friend and professional collaborator, heads the environmental engineering department. He never saw William again, but he didn't need to. William had accomplished his mission. He had reminded Robert that it's never too late to build a bridge to the person you were meant to be. The most remarkable part of Robert's story isn't that he survived terminal cancer, though that was certainly miraculous. The most remarkable part is that he learned to see himself through the eyes of his own unrealized potential and discovered that person was still accessible, still possible, still waiting patiently for permission to exist. Robert keeps that college graduation photograph on his new drafting table now, next to the acceptance letter from Paris that he finally had the courage to frame. Sometimes, he catches himself smiling at the young man in the picture, the one who dreamed of changing the world with beautiful bridges. "Thank you, William," he whispers occasionally. But he knows now that he's really thanking himself, both the man he was and the man he chose to become. Sometimes our second chance comes not from mysterious strangers, but from mysterious aspects of ourselves we'd forgotten existed. Sometimes the bridge we need to build isn't over a river or a valley. Sometimes it's over the chasm between who we are and who we could still become. Thank you for joining me for another story that reminds us it's never too late to meet the best version of yourself. This is Second Chance Stories. Until next time, keep building bridges.